This is Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Welcome back. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk. And extraordinary interview with Dr. Waleed Phares. Speaking of extraordinary, an extraordinary phone call I'm going to tell you about in just a moment, and you'll have access to it through the Facebook page. You can click on the link, or you can go directly. You'll want to check it out, trust me. Well, Fort Hood shooter Nidal Hasan has decided to represent himself in court, and it's interesting because the man who murdered 13 and attempted to murder 32, that's what he's being charged with, he has committed this act. He was in touch with al-Awlaki. He said Allah Akbar when he did it, and we're not calling it a terrorist attack. And that's interesting in itself. But what I want to do first is address when this happened. And it was arguably it is the largest domestic terrorist attack that we've experienced inside on an army base in a military installation. But it is also something that really gives us insight into how some people in this country, and yes, President Obama and the administration, look at terrorism, view the war that we are in, because they've changed the lexicon, the vocabulary, the words that we use to describe it. In fact, we all know that the words that were used to describe Fort Hood was workplace violence as opposed to an act of terror. Now, on November 5th, 2009, President Obama obviously was made aware of this heinous act as it was developing as a major news story. And he had already been cited to give a speech that day. And so at 5 p.m., people were told that he will address the Fort Hood shooting. And interestingly enough, when he did so, he went about it in a way that would be, some have deemed, insensitive. And I laugh only because how ridiculous it is. Yes, of course it's insensitive. But for 2 minutes, he did not mention it. The event was the Tribal Nations Conference hosted by the Department of Interior's Bureau of Indian Affairs. And the president, as you'll hear, is going to the podium and specifically set to what people believe will come first will be the attack. But he doesn't speak to the attack first. In fact, he waits 2+ minutes to mention the attack. And that's what we'll begin with. Roll it.
12 people murdered and 31 injured in that shooting rampage at Fort Hood. We're told that President Obama will address this shooting rampage now. Let's listen live.
Please, everybody, I hear that Dr. Joe Medicine Crow was around, and so I want to give a shout out to that Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Good to see you. I want to give you my solemn guarantee that this is not the end of a process, but a beginning of a process. We are going to follow up. Every single member of my team understands that this is a top priority for us. It's not something that we just give lip service. I plan to make some broader remarks about the challenges that lay ahead for Native Americans, as well as collaboration with our administration. But as some of you might have heard, there has been a tragic shooting at the Fort Hood Army base in Texas. This is not something that we just give lip service to.
Now that was 2.5 minutes plus into the speech after giving a shout out. Now, I will always give the benefit of the doubt to someone who makes a mistake, someone doesn't remember something. But in this case, I can't help but get an understanding into what the president and how he views these things. Because if you look, they had a number of headlines running. I checked out a video on YouTube, and I'll post that YouTube video that pretty much edited it so we didn't have to listen to the entire 2.5 minutes plus before you mentioned it. And the behavior since of calling it workplace violence. Now, there's a reason behind that. And Brian Ross, who spoke with one of the people, one of the heroes who arrived, a police officer who arrived at the shooting. And then he spoke to another survivor of the shooting. And I give you kind of a snippet of this ABC News report because they are breaking news in the sense of a video of the attack that was newly released. And Brian Ross, I'm surprised he didn't blame a Tea Partier, but that's another story altogether. The point is this, he's getting this information. And then he goes to the Department of Veterans Affairs and asks a question. So you're going to get all of that. And it's going to start out with a woman who was brought in for an a State of Union address in which President Obama said, hey, we're going to be there for you. And she talks about being disappointed. And then you'll hear the rest of the report. All right, roll it.
Betrayal would be a good word. Not to the least little bit have the victims been taken care of. In fact, they've been neglected very badly.
So the president's promise was not fulfilled?
No.
What has so upset Munley and other victims and led them to file a lawsuit is the decision to deny the injured soldiers a Purple Heart, terming the Fort Hood shooting simply workplace violence. Recently retired Staff Sergeant Sean Manning, who still has bullets lodged in his body, says that means lower priority veterans' medical care and a loss of tens of thousands of dollars in benefits.
Basically, they're treating us like, I was downtown and got hit by a car.
The Army says it's not true that victims are being neglected. And Secretary of the Army John McHugh told ABC News the Purple Heart can only be awarded if the attack involves a foreign terrorist element.
So to declare that soldier a foreign terrorist would have a potentially profound effect on the ability to conduct the trial.
Are you satisfied with that, Secretary?
I think I've answered your questions repeatedly.
All right, now I have just shared a phone call that took place between Fred Jackson, who was guest hosting for Dan the Man Celia on financial issues. And the call is from a Fort Hood survivor's mom. Quote, my son gets nothing for heroicism. And this is the idea. If you classify it in a certain way, as you just heard, they won't qualify for benefits. And you can understand the outrage that so many people feel when you are not awarding this due to a policy matter that, if it needs to be addressed, needs to be addressed and changed. And certainly the survivors need to be taken care of. So I invite you to check out that. It's just one of the many reasons you listen to AFR Talk. Fred Jackson is American Family News director. He's the head guy, and he takes this call. You'll want to hear it, but also it tells you where and what our news coverage is about with American Family News, onenewsnow.com, and why you need to lock it in. I want to go to another part to this that I was getting about, because the reason I'm holding things back just a bit is because I don't like to go to somebody's motives. I know the president, any president, doesn't want soldiers slaughtered on a military base by some jihadists. But it really chips me, and it goes beyond that, to words that, well, quite frankly, are out of bounds. But the bottom line is, this is willful blindness, and the president has exercised this. It goes to a much greater point. The idea that we can wish away the enemy and the war that has been brought to our shores. But that war has been going on for 30 years, and there is a butcher's bill to it. And I'm not just speaking post-September 11th. I'm speaking beforehand. And how to deal with this, and how to deal with the enemy. Now, on the flip side of the break, we'll explore this point, wrap up the segment, and get to some other developing news, including the IRS investigation, an interview with Hans von Spakovsky, and then we will close the show with Ryan Morrow from the ClarionProject.org, where he is National Security Analyst. Get the latest on the terror threat and developments. But on the flip side, we're going to explore what is the president's approach and, quite frankly, the left's approach to fighting the war on Islamofascism. And when you say you support the troops, a couple questions. Why do you ignore, on 3 separate occasions, the generals, from troop levels to overall strategy to timelines? Why do you ignore the experts? Why do you provide a timeline? Why is it that you took Iraq from a victory to now what looks like a Shia superstate in the form of Iranian control? Why do you do it? What's the outcome? Why do you recognize the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamists, who want to implement Sharia law, who since 1979 have laid out their plan in something that's called the Project? We'll answer those questions. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk.